Hello and welcome to the Times of India. You're watching Global Pulse with me, Neha Khanna. India now officially faces the highest tariffs in the world imposed by US President Donald Trump. It's a staggering 50%, with the additional 25% punitive tariffs kicking in today. And the list of Indian goods that are on that list, lo and behold, excludes petroleum products. This despite the fact that Trump has been claiming that the sky-high tariffs are a punishment for India for buying Russian oil, funding the Russian war machine, and profiteering from the Ukraine war. But guess who buys refined oil from India? The European Union and the United States, amongst other countries. You can put two and two together. And there are no such punitive tariffs on China and the European Union, the world's largest buyers of Russian oil and gas respectively. However hypocritical all of this may be, it doesn't surprise anyone anymore. With Trump, anything is possible. Of course, the tariffs are expected to hit Indian exports hard, and many sectors will bear the brunt. According to the Global Trade Research Initiative, or GTRI, an India-based think tank, 2/3 of India's exports to the US, worth over $60 billion annually, are now in the tariff net. The total volume of India's exports to the US is in the region of $87 billion. However, the government of India says the tariffs will impact $48 billion worth of exports. Officials have warned that the new duties could make shipments to the US commercially unviable, triggering massive job losses and slower economic growth. Labor-intensive sectors such as textiles, gems and jewelry, leather goods, food and automobiles will be hardest hit. The think tank says exports in the affected sectors could collapse by as much as 70%, falling from $60 billion to under $19 billion. The overall shipments to the US could decline by 43%, putting hundreds of thousands of jobs in India's export hubs in jeopardy. Not content with inflicting this already severe damage on the India-US relationship, the Trump administration seems eager to target the H1B visa program next. Such a move will be another deathly blow to the bilateral relationship. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has said the US intends to change its immigration system, which includes changes in the H1B visa and green card programs. In a television interview, Lutnick said, "The current H1B visa system is a scam that lets foreign workers fill American job opportunities. Hiring American workers should be the priority of all great American businesses," he said. A large number of H1B visa recipients are highly skilled Indian professionals, especially in the IT sector. And scores of far-right anti-immigrant MAGA activists who constitute Trump's core support base have been demanding the scrapping of this visa program. In January this year, Trump had expressed his support for the H1B visa program, saying America needs capable and talented people from abroad as they help boost the American economy. And while that fact has not changed, what has is Trump's stance towards India, with his hostility growing by the day, going by his recent utterances. Most in India believe that Trump's tariffs on the country have little to do with trade or Russian oil, and everything to do with his personal pique and vendetta driven by his bruised ego. Why? Because Trump has claimed over 30 or 40 times, we've lost count, that it was he who negotiated the ceasefire between India and Pakistan in the month of May during Operation Sindoor, the 100-hour military conflict between India and its terror-exporting neighbor. India has repeatedly and emphatically rejected that claim, maintaining that the ceasefire was agreed upon between the two countries after Islamabad reached out to New Delhi seeking a cessation of hostilities. But those clarifications have not stopped Donald Trump from claiming credit for the ceasefire and even saying that he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize for it. India's Foreign Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, recently told Parliament that there was no phone call between the US President and Prime Minister Narendra Modi between the 22nd of April and the 17th of June. And yet, Trump has gone ahead and claimed that he spoke to Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor and demanded that the operation be brought to an end, or else he would impose skyrocketing tariffs on both countries and not enter into any trade deals with them. Trump says within 5 hours of his threat, the India-Pakistan conflict was over. The question we're asking on Global Pulse tonight is this: is the India-US relationship likely to encounter an even more rocky patch in the days ahead? Some believe it's already hit rock bottom. How should New Delhi deal with an increasingly adversarial Donald Trump? Will we have to wait for 3.5 years, the remainder of the Trump presidency, before we see any semblance of normalcy in the India-US ties, touted as the most important strategic partnership of the 21st century not too long ago?
We have negotiated historic trade deals with the United Kingdom, China, Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, who was here yesterday, and the European Union. Foreign nations are now paying hundreds of billions of dollars straight into our treasury, and numbers that nobody's ever seen before. As you know, we made trade deals with a lot of countries, and many of those countries, just to be able to sit at the table, are paying us hundreds of billions of dollars. We made a trade deal with the European Union. They were rough on us for a long time. And now we have a very good deal. We made that with them. Trillions of dollars is coming into our country, trillions. I'm talking to a very terrific man, Modi of India. And I say, what's going on with you in Pakistan? Then I'm talking to Pakistan on trade. I said, what's going on with you in India? I said, no, I don't want to make a trade deal with you. You're going to have a nuclear war. You guys are going to end up in a nuclear war. And that was very important to them. I said, call me back tomorrow, but we're not going to do any deals with you, or we're going to put tariffs on you that are so high. You were there, Howard, right? Yep. You're going to put tariffs on you that was so high, I don't give a damn, your head's going to spin. Within about 5 hours, it was done. It was done.
All right, let's introduce our panel. Joining me on Global Pulse tonight is Professor Arun Kumar. He is an economist, a renowned one at that. We also have with us Rabinder Sachdev, Director of the US India Political Action Committee. And in a moment, we're hoping to be joined by Brad Bannon, political commentator from the United States. Thanks very much to my guests for joining me. Professor Arun Kumar, let me begin with you. India now faces 50% tariffs imposed by the United States, the highest imposed on any country in the world. The government of India says that the tariffs will impact $48 billion worth of Indian exports. However, some think tanks estimate that over $60 billion worth of Indian exports are now likely to be affected. They also say that exports in the affected sectors, for instance, gems and jewelry, could in fact, and textiles of course, could in fact drop by a whopping 70%, and lakhs of jobs could be lost. What is your assessment, sir? How big of an impact could these tariffs have on India's exports and its economy?
So, Indian exports facing 50%, there are two implications. One is that earlier, prior to President Trump coming, India was facing 3% average tariff. Now it's going to be 50%. That's a huge rise. And at that level, it'll be very difficult for our exporters to export because the margins in export are not very high. So they cannot cut the prices and do that. The government cannot give the kind of subsidy that would be needed to actually make those exports viable at 50%. So in other words, the trade between India and the US, exports from India will be hit very hard, and especially these are all in areas which are labor intensive areas. The second aspect is that India's competitors like Vietnam, Bangladesh, Pakistan, China, etc., face much lower tariff, and therefore they'll be able to displace the Indian exports to the US from these countries. So, in other words, there are two hits that will be there. One is our exporters' margins. The other is, of course, the trade from other countries, and therefore our trade will decline, as you rightly said. Now, the extent of decline, roughly about $47-48 billion would be hit. How much of that will come down? I think most of it will come down. And because these are labor-intensive areas, there'll be a problem. Now, the question is, why is President Trump doing this to India? And that is because this is a hard face of capitalism he's presenting, where he's saying, I want things my way. So even with EU, the largest trader, it has got 0% duty, whereas its exports would be facing 15% duty. And $550 billion of investment is sought from there, plus arms, etc. Same with Japan. So the US president is getting his way because he's managed to divide the rest of the nations, and bargain with each of them separately. Actually, the WTO has been made defunct. If WTO minus the USA had prevailed, then the US would have had to back down. But unfortunately, the sort of lack of trust between other nations means that everybody has an export surplus and they will try and dump it on each other. So China would look for other markets, EU would look for other markets, India would look for other markets, and that's where our problem will be. We'll not be able to increase that, and we'll have to worry about the dumping that might come from others. So not only would there be a direct impact on what we sell to the US, but there may be other indirect impact on what we may be able to sell to others and whether we can find the markets. The third thing that will hit us is that our trade surplus will decline, because with the US we had a surplus, and therefore the rupee would weaken. Rupee would also weaken because of the uncertainty that is there in the stock market. Private investment would be affected adversely. Private investment was already rather weak. That will become weaker, and therefore that will affect the overall economic strength that we have. So, in other words, overall investment from the private sector may also decline. Therefore, all these effects will play up, and it'll have an effect on our exporters, but it'll also have an effect on the general economy, on employment, because if employment declines in these labor-intensive areas, then demand would decline, and when demand declines, private investment would also decline. So in other words, there are multiple macroeconomic impacts that will be there as a result of this tariff that is being imposed. And what is clear is that, J.D. Vance has said it, Treasury Secretary Bessent has said it, Lavaro has said it, that India wants to be a strategic partner of the US, but is not behaving like a strategic partner. In other words, they don't want India-China, Russia relations to be good. They want India to have relations only with the US and follow the US. Now, if that is the situation, India cannot do that, because India is heavily dependent on imports from China. India is heavily dependent on Russia for defense equipment. Our S-400, our BrahMos, our Sukhoi, they all depend on the Russian supplies. So we cannot fulfill the condition that the US wants. So in other words, this strategic change, India is got caught between the US, China, and Russia.
India's got caught between these major powers. A lot of these Trump cabinet ministers have said that India is not behaving like a strategic partner. Fact is that it is America which really is not behaving like a friend or an ally. It is Trump is being extremely hostile and adversarial towards India. Many believe it is actually for very personal reasons that have little or nothing to do with trade. But that apart, sir, you have painted a grim picture. You're saying that, yes, there could be massive job losses in the export sectors that are likely to be hit hardest. Private investment could take a hit. The rupee could further weaken. And the hit will be not just on the export sectors, but overall on the Indian economy. So the question that I want to ask you is, what, according to you, are India's options at this point in time, given that Trump is digging his heels in? never mind the fact that he singled India out for these punitive tariffs. Similar tariffs could have been imposed on China and the European Union for buying Russian oil and energy. Clearly, that's not happened. But how do you believe India can best absorb the impact of these tariffs? And do you believe, given the circumstances and all the tensions and frictions in the India-US relationship, we can still hope to see a trade deal between the two countries in the foreseeable future?
Are you asking me?
Yes, sir. That's for you.
Okay, so unless we change strategically, and we don't have that kind of strength, China has something to offer to the US, and that's why China is getting a more favorable deal. It's got a 90-day reprieve where the negotiations will continue with China. India doesn't have any similar thing to offer to the US market, and that's why US is able to press down on us, and we are not able to actually react to what the US is doing. So India will have to wait for the Ukraine Russia war to come to some kind of a ceasefire or a peace deal, which might then help India, in terms of the imports of oil that India is doing. Other than that, what India will have to do is, as the Prime Minister is saying, we have to depend on the internal market. Now, depending on the internal market doesn't mean self-reliance, because we still depend very heavily on Chinese imports. But what it will mean is that we can boost the internal market by generating greater demand. Now, exporters will not benefit from it because their export demand will be declining. But if the general economy does better, then everybody else will be doing better. So if we have purchasing power in the hands of, say, agriculturists, which are 45% of the workforce, and of the micro and the small sector, which is 48% of the workforce, if there is greater purchasing power there, then demand in the economy will increase. And as demand increases, organized sector will invest more, and the micro sector and the small sector will invest more, and that will boost the economy. So the decline that will take place as a result of exports and the uncertainty can be countered by trying to boost the internal market, especially in agriculture incomes and in the micro and the small sectors. So I think our strategy has to rebalance external relationships as well as internally. We have to rebalance where we generate demand from. The GST reduction will benefit the organized sector, but will not benefit the unorganized sector, because as Arun Jaitley used to say, 5% of the units pay 95% of the tax, and these 5% units are the big units. So the small and the micro will not benefit from these tax cuts because they are outside the purview of the GST. What we also will see is whether our middle classes will increase demand, because the income tax rates were reduced earlier, whether that will affect it. But again, that will benefit only about 2.5 to 3 crores out of 145 crore Indians. So we need to actually recalibrate our policy so that we get greater farm incomes, we get greater micro sector and the small sector, and these will then boost the organized sector also. It's not that one will be at the expense of the other. The organized sector balance sheets are very good. They have enough cash available with them. They can invest more, provided the demand is there. So we need to generate extra demand. And that's where I think the government will have to recalibrate policy.
The government will have to recalibrate its policy. We need to generate extra demand domestically. Those are important points. So I'll come back to you in a moment to discuss that in further detail. Let me now go across to Rabinder Sachdev. Rabinder Sachdev, if anyone had hoped that maybe Donald Trump would do a rethink on these punitive 25% tariffs, clearly that's not been the case. These tariffs have now come into effect. We're talking about 50% tariffs that, as has been mentioned by Professor Arun Kumar and many others, are likely to hit Indian exports hard. And while we are yet to even absorb the impact of these tariffs, because it's just day one, there are already indications from the Trump administration that they might go after the H1B visa program next. And I think it would be safe to say that if that does happen, it would be another deadly blow to the India-US relationship, as a very large number of recipients of H1B visas are skilled Indian professionals, especially in the IT sector. You've heard what Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said, describing the H1B visa program as a scam. Do you believe that that's something that they could go after next? How much worse do you think it's really going to get between India and the United States?
Thank you, Neha. A pleasure to be with you and Professor Kumar. A very deep, cerebral, and reflective discussion. Thank you for, conducting it in that manner. One. Secondly, regarding H1 and then other points I'll come to. I myself been on an F1 and an H1, and then I did not. I mean, whichever way. So I do understand the H1 little bit also, and we've covered, and you have also, and I think Ishani, your colleague, used to write a lot on H1 and this thing. So long and short being, this will have an impact on the H1 scenarios in the US. There is no doubt on it. They're going after it. It's just only a question of how they figure out what to do. Lutnick's statement, you talked about H1. On green card, he is saying that Americans, when they are, in a job, their median income is $75,000. Whereas when people get green cards, their median income is $66,000. That means American employees or whatever are underemploying or not paying the right wages and not hiring the Americans, right? So even green cards are under scanner. Lots of churn going on there, and we can, unwrap this bundle. But coming back to the discussion you were having with Professor Kumar, a few points I would like to say. Big picture. I think India is right now at a fork. If I can show this, okay, it's the proverbial fork in the road. Okay, now we have decided to go a certain path, that is to kind of continue with what we believe and stand up for it. Sure, in a couple of years, in a year or two, or let's say at least by the time Trump goes, or within the administration, things will come back to some normal. But whatever be the new normal, will not be lower than 15 or 20% trade tariffs. Forget even if the oil goes away, right? But in the next 1 or 2 years, much water would have flown down the Yamuna and the Potomac. India and the US would be on a different trajectory. Public opinions, leadership opinions, and multiple geopolitical flux which is happening there. So that seems to be unfortunately the outcome of some of this which is happening. Now, in terms of the impact of these tariffs, there's a thumb rule out there, and Professor Kumar could maybe very well, of course, would know much more, but he has almost said the same thing. If 50% tariff are imposed on us, it would mean a loss of about $50 billion of exports. Back of envelope, 1% tariff to the US means $1 billion exports lost. And $1 billion exports lost means around 1 lakh jobs lost in India, if not lost, threatened. So with 50 billion, 50% tariff, 50 billion loss, or 45, 48, as Professor Kumar was saying, billion, theoretically, loss of exports, that would translate to something like 45 lakh or so, or sorry, such jobs lost in India. If not that much, maybe 20 lakh or 25 lakhs. So that will be a number. And by the way, these numbers of the jobs which are lost will be jobs lost. See, the small entrepreneur who's exporting carpets from Baduy, that gentleman was having annual turnover of 10 crore a year. So every year he was earning around 1-2 crore years as a businessman, right? He's made his life, he's settled, okay, everything. But this year his export orders are going down. He will say, okay, sorry, my employers, off you go. So the brunt will be borne by these workers in these sectors. So there will
Undoubtedly.
be an impact. And as to, okay, now the external and internal. So on external, yes, several things could be done, and we can get into that. Internal, also several things would have to be done. My one thesis which I'm pushing is that internally, India should. This is really, if you see, a moment of national reckoning, historical moment. This is a time, I think, when India should institute a 6-day work week for 1 year, only 1 year, 6-day work week, government and private sector. It will boost our GDP by 2% theoretically. And
Okay.
also, it will indicate to the world that India is. We are saying that we will not bend down, we will work hard, we will do this, that. How will we do it?
It's the time you're suggesting for the country to come together in many ways. I take your point. Let me now go across to Brad Bannon, political commentator who joins us live from Washington D.C. Mr. Bannon, welcome to Global Pulse. Here in India, we're
Thanks for the
still
invite.
trying to Here in India, we're still trying to wrap our heads around the 50% tariffs that have been imposed by the Trump administration on India, which have now officially kicked in today. Punitive tariffs for buying Russian oil. And the irony is that the list of Indian exports that have actually been exempt from these tariffs include petroleum products. Make of that what you will. Our foreign minister said just the other day that if you don't like buying refined oil from India, don't buy it. But fact is, the European Union buys it and America buys it. And I'm guessing that will continue even after the imposition of these tariffs. How do you look at the Trump administration singling India out for these tariffs? Sparing China, which is the largest buyer of Russian oil, and sparing the European Union, which is the largest buyer of Russian gas in the world. Of course, all of this is being done in the name of the Ukraine war. But many here in India believe that there is more to it than meets the eye. How is this being seen in the United States?
Well, if it's any consolation, I think Americans are as unhappy as Indians are about President Trump's tariff policies. They're very unpopular. People believe that the horrific tariffs that Trump is lying on some countries, such as India, are raising prices for consumers in the United States. And if you look at the national polls of Americans, the issue that Americans are most concerned about is in the cost of living increases. And those economists believe those are directly related to Donald Trump's draconian tariff policies, which are in danger of ruining the American economy and hurting the economy of other nations.
That's an excellent point you make. That this could very well boomerang on the American economy. Cost of living is already a huge issue in that country. Also, before I take this back to the Indian panelists, I want to ask you, Mr. Bannon, there is this growing feeling in India that Donald Trump is being extremely hostile and adversarial towards India. The India-US relationship was till not too long ago being touted as the most important strategic partnership of the 21st century. And today you have a situation where Donald Trump is almost treating India as an enemy. It just keeps getting worse and worse. Daily insults being hurled at India by Trump and his close aides. He's called India a dead economy. His growing closeness to Pakistan, which obviously is a matter of concern for India. These tariffs, they're also talking about going after the H1B visa program next. The Commerce Secretary has said so, and that could be another big blow to the India-US relationship, given that a very large number of Indians are recipients of H1B visas. My question to you is a larger one. Where do you see the India-US relationship going from here? There are many who are now really pessimistic. They believe that the relationship has hit its lowest point in 3 decades and that we may just have to wait for another 3.5 years, right till the end of the Trump presidency, for things to normalize between the two countries. It's that bad right now. At least that's the feeling here in India.
Well, and I think, I think many Americans are concerned. What President Trump is doing is counterproductive to the United States. India is a very valuable ally. The United States should be shifting its focus from Europe to Asia, and India is a very important nation to United States security, and it's a very important nation to have a strong alliance with. And Donald Trump is throwing all that away and creating a hostility towards an important nation, which is very important to American national interest. And again, it is counterproductive to the American economy. If you look at the national polls in the United States, only about 1 out of every 3 Americans approve of Trump's effort to fight inflation and bring down the cost of living. And with these draconian taxes on India and other nations, this is raising prices in the United States, and it's antagonizing an important ally for the United States in Asia, which is very important. I mean, Donald Trump's policies don't make much sense to any Americans. We have a very hostile relationship with China, which means we should have a very strong alliance with India. And it's counterproductive to American national security policy. It's very counterproductive to American economic policy. And Americans are starting to boil over. And unfortunately, there's very little, the Democrats don't have enough strength now
Yes.
to block Trump. And hopefully, if we Democrats take back control of Congress in the midterm
In the
elections in November
midterms. Yes.
2026, we
Hmm.
can exert some influence. But Trump's policies are very dangerous, and most Americans, I'd say, recognize it.
I'm glad you say that, because yes, this was meant to have been a very important relationship. For the longest time, many believed that America saw India as a counterweight to China. And ironically, with his aggressive bullying tactics, that's what many here in India are calling it, Donald Trump seems to have actually pushed India closer to both Russia and China. And you're also right in talking about how this could actually begin to adversely impact the American economy itself. So let me take this back to the economist on the panel. Professor Arun Kumar, two questions for you there, sir. Do you agree with our American guest who says that, cost of living is already a huge issue for the average American citizen? Donald Trump thinks he is filling up American coffers with the revenue that is coming in through these tariffs. He even boasted about trillions of dollars coming into the US through these tariffs. But do you agree with Brad Bannon, who says that the cost of living crisis could actually worsen significantly in the United States, and this could eventually boomerang on the American economy itself? I mean, has Donald Trump really thought this through? Of course, Brad Bannon says that none of his policies make sense even to Americans, leave alone the rest of the world. That's my first question to you. And the second is, do you believe that despite all the friction and the tensions that we see between the two countries, there could still be a trade deal between India and the United States in the foreseeable future?
So, to get to the two questions that you're asking, it's very clear that tariffs are paid by the American consumers. These are not paid by the countries which are selling, because these enter into the prices. The exporters can reduce their margins a little bit, but usually the export margins are not very high. So therefore, the prices in the US will rise. Now, people say that why have in the last 6 months prices not risen? The rate of inflation, why in the USA has not gone up more? And that is because exporters are exporting very rapidly. Like from India, iPhones were being airlifted to the US to beat the tariffs. Now that will last only up to a point of time, and now the prices are beginning to rise. The second is, people are saying that stock markets are doing very well, and those are doing very well because the big tech companies are doing very well, and therefore the stock markets are doing very well. It doesn't mean that the general stock markets are going to be doing well, because as the prices rise, as was mentioned, the demand in the US economy will decline. So this demand that will decline will mean that the US economy will slow down. So on the one hand, there'll be a price rise. On the other hand, there'll be a slowdown in the economy. So we are facing stagflationary situation. Now, the stagflationary situation is very difficult to deal with, because what you do for price control is different from what you have to do to boost the economy. The third thing that I think is very important is that if, as was mentioned by Mr. Brad, the US population gets affected, the prices get affected in the USA, then in the coming elections in 2026, the trifactor would be gone. The trifactor is that the control is there on the justice system, on the legislature, and the presidentship. And I think there are concerns that it's not the president's power to levy tariff. It is the Congress's power to levy tariff. And there are also cases that are there where people are challenging the tariffs that are being levied. If the trifecta goes, I think the power of Trump to continue he thinks that the foreign taxes, whereas actually the problem that is going to come for the US will be internal. So apart from the external pressures that could come, the internal pressures are, I think, going to rise. Externally, if there is WTO minus the US and everybody else agrees to trade amongst themselves and to put tariff on the US will be forced to withdraw these tariffs very quickly. But that depends on whether is trust between the other nations, between EU, China, India, and so on. If there is trust, then we can go for WTO minus the US, and that will force the US to withdraw whatever tariffs it is imposing at the moment.
That's an interesting thought, WTO minus the United States, because I think many would agree that Donald Trump has single-handedly undermined the institution of the WTO to such an extent that's, it's probably irrelevant in some ways today. And the man, frankly, is acting as a dictator, and I'm not sure he even worries so much about getting US Congress approval. However, things could change after the midterm elections. Let me bring in Rabinder Sachdeva at this point. Rabinder Sachdeva, do you agree with Brad Bannon, who says that, of course, we've been talking about the impact that the tariffs are likely to have on the Indian economy and Indian exports and jobs. And of course, that doesn't look good, but this could boomerang on the American economy and people. Some might argue, who is advising Donald Trump? He thinks trillions of dollars are coming into the US. Some say that, he's doing this keeping in mind the huge American debt. But at the end of the day, this is going to be felt by the American people. And then there are the midterms next year. Do you believe that Donald Trump even cares about the midterms, considering that he knows the Constitution doesn't allow him to run for another term in office?
Neha, agreed. All that is there. But bottom line, whatever happens in America stays with them. How does it impact us? If 2 years hence or November elections...
Mr. Sachdeva, we can't hear you, sir. Could you just try and unmute yourself?
I'm unmuted. I am unmuted. Can you
Yes,
hear
we
me
can
now?
hear you now. Yes, please go
Sorry,
ahead.
thank you. See, quick bullet points. One, how does it matter to us if Trump ends up in a hot soup in America? India has to look at its own interests. If Trump, there are protests against Trump. A large number of people are critical of Trump. All of that is there, but the real fact is he's in power and he will be in power for the next 3.5 years. Sure, after the midterm elections, his powers may be reduced. The Congress majority may shift, but even then, he's pushing the envelope of executive power. So it gives us no benefit in India, from an Indian perspective, to take pleasure that Trump is going to be in hot soup in a year and American economy will go down the dumps. It doesn't impact. It doesn't bring us any succor, right? But yes, that could happen. Now, couple of quick points now. In terms of his tariff policy, you see, from his point, as our colleagues have also said, tariffs, he is looking at collecting about $600 billion a year from, yes, American importers as tariffs. 10 years, $6 trillion. American industry will hurt. What they're looking is, with this collection of tariff money in the US Treasury, they will give relief to targeted industries. Right now, the auto industry. Okay, steel manufacturers in America are happy, but the car sellers are not, because they have to buy steel at more expensive prices. So what the Trump administration is doing is it's giving a rebate on the interest on the EMI if you buy a new car. It's lowering the interest. So what he's going to be doing is robbing Peter, that is American taxpayer itself, to pay Paul, so that within America, the impact of tariffs is less. Also, one critical pillar in this strategy is to keep the prices of oil low. As long as the price of oil remains low, because oil contributes to the transport and logistics cost, he thinks he can manage the inflation. So that's his tariff policy overall, maybe, etc. Now, as to why is he adversarial to India, I think one of the reasons, other than the peak and all, is that China is too big to disturb for Trump right now. Trump has kind of disturbed or disrupted, the trade relationships and tariffs with all of the world, including India. He is managing it, somehow his advisors. But if they at the same time go with China and say, okay, China 50% tariffs, that will upset apple carts in variables they cannot manage. So probably they're thinking, okay, let's hold on to China for the time being. Right. Another point that you mentioned, that okay, after 3.5 years it could be normal. I repeat again, by the end of 3 years or 2 years, if any normalcy comes, forget. So let's say the oil tariffs go away, only the trade tariffs remain, not 25, 20%. By then, India would have gone down a different road. 2 years
Yes.
is a long time in today's age. 6 months is too long. Modi is meeting SCO, Putin, all of these. World is happening in instant iterations right now. It will be too long. It's a it's a matrix being constructed right now. World matrix. The world
Yes.
order is being constructed right now. So at this point of time, each actions by these leaders are amazingly important and will set a path. As I said, you'll go down a fork. Lastly, yes, it is pushing India to Russia and China in a way, we think, but we have also, of course, complexities, and we will have to also, India will have to figure out how and where with Russia and China. China is no panacea for us. We have interconnected economy with Russia, sure, but we have to see realistically how big is the Russian market. Russian defense items for us, sure, we want them, we will take them. Fantastic, trusting partner. But Russian technology has shown to be not so good in the Ukrainian war. And right now, Russia is absolutely almost in the orbit of China. Its
Yes.
economy is dependent, technology is dependent. So we will have to play a matrix role in all of this situation. So it's interesting time, as some
Yes.
proverbs say. But whatever, my bottom line is, whatever happens in America, we cannot take any pleasure that American economy will suffer and there'll be, a downturn in
I think
America
we're
because
just looking at various dimensions of this entire story, how it's likely to pan out for India and for America. Honestly, I think that is what it's about. But I agree with you on the larger point you're making about how there is a matrix that is being constructed as we speak. I think it would be safe to say that some major geopolitical realignments have been triggered by Donald Trump's tariff tyranny. So let me take this back to our American guest, Brad Bannon. You know, Trump's hostility and tariff tyranny have dealt such a massive blow to the India US relationship that there's a strong feeling here in India that the distrust is now really deep, and it'll take much more than the remainder of the Trump presidency for the India US relationship to come back from this, to recover from the damage that has been inflicted. And as you already see, these geopolitical realignments are taking place as we speak. India's Prime Minister is set to visit China next week to attend the SCO summit. President Putin of Russia will be there too. There are likely to be talks between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of that summit. We've seen a thaw in India-China ties despite it being a fraught relationship, despite the border dispute between the two countries. The bottom line is that, right now, it's very hard for anyone to trust the United States of America, and least of all for people here in India who are harboring a deep resentment towards the United States, thanks to what we've seen over the last few months.
Well, the reality is, Americans, you and your panel are trying to make sense of what's happening with Donald Trump. Most Americans can't either. The president's job ratings are low. There's a larger point here. The United States under Donald Trump is alienating all its allies, not just India. We've alienated our European allies because of Trump's willingness to play along with Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. We are, weakening our ties with a very important partner in Asia, which is India, and most Americans disapprove of Donald Trump's policies. And I think you're right. It's going for the next president, and I hope the next president is a strong alternative to Donald Trump. I certainly hope that the first one of the first initiatives from the new president, whoever it is going to repair United States alliances with important allies like the Europeans and the Indians, because we have very important national security interests with a strong alliance with India because of the threats of China. China is becoming increasingly aggressive in Asia, and we need strong allies like India to do it. So again, not only is Trump alienating American voters, he's alienating our important allies in the world, in Asia and in Europe. And it's going to probably take years for the next president, whoever it is, to repair them. And I hope the next president who's elected in 2028 is not someone who is going to follow Donald Trump's path, but will break a new path for the United States and its allies around the world.
Again, ironical. We thought that China was America's biggest adversary, but it turns out that Donald Trump is actually busy wooing China, and the country that should have been a natural ally to the United States is being treated by the Trump administration almost like an enemy. And this is, of course, a country, India, that could have acted as the perfect counterweight to China, but who's going to tell Donald Trump that? I think what he has done through his actions really is to prove that the United States is a very unreliable partner, which is why I say that it might take years for the relationship to recover from the damage that's been inflicted. Professor Arun Kumar, I'll give you the last words, sir. In the earlier segment, while talking about the impact of these tariffs on the Indian economy, you talked about how the Indian government needs to generate more demand domestically, needs to recalibrate its policy. But there's also been a lot of talk of late and commentary on the need for some sweeping economic reforms in India. There are many who are making the point that we've waited far too long to bring in those economic reforms, and there could not be a better time than now for India to go all out and prove to itself and the world that it means business. Do you believe, sir, that that is the real path for India to take now? And do you believe that we will be able to pull it off?
So the question is, what kind of reforms does India need? If you look at private investment has been rather slow for now many years, and that's because the private sector is saying that the demand is inadequate. So how do you generate adequate demand in the economy? That becomes a prime case. The balance sheet of the organized sector is very good. They have enough surpluses on their balance sheet. They can invest a lot more, but instead of investing a lot more here in India, they're taking capital out of the country. Ultra high net worth individuals are leaving country in large numbers because they feel that the investment climate in India is not appropriate. So we need to improve the investment climate, and for that, demand has to be generated. And 94% of Indians working in the unorganized sector, they have low incomes, and that's why the demand is low. So we need to increase the demand there by pumping in purchasing power into the hands of the agriculture sector, the micro and the small sector, as I was saying earlier. If you do that, then the demand would rise. If demand rises, then the organized sector would also invest more. Investment would become more buoyant, and Indian economy would depend more on its internal markets as opposed to the external markets. So that is the one big reform that is required in the Indian context, because what has happened is, since the time of demonetization and GST and the NBFC crisis, the unorganized sector has been unambiguously declining. And when the unorganized sector declines, and you can see evidence of that, for instance, e-commerce is growing at 20-30%, the neighborhood stores are going down. You can see, for instance, in the textile sector, the organized sector is doing better, the unorganized sector is not doing so well, in the luggage industry, in the pressure cooker industry, and so on. So you need to boost the small and the micro, and that's where 11.5 crore workers are there. And the average employment is 1.7. Now, if you can raise that to 3.4, you'll have another 11 crore jobs. So you need to generate jobs, and employment has been a problem. We have large amount of underemployment and disguised unemployment. That needs to be taken care of. Then more incomes will be there. Also in agriculture, bulk of the farmers are actually 85% farmers are below 5 acres. They operate small farms. and therefore their incomes are very important if demand is to be increased. Now, for that, you need to support agriculture in a major way so that the incomes there rise. You do these things, then I think the Indian economy will be able to be buoyant and will be able to take care of the problem that is coming from the export decline that's likely to take place. And we also need to worry about dumping from other countries, because every country would have a surplus. And that's what I was arguing, that we need trust between nations. If there's trust that we're not going to dump on each other, then we can manage the trade so that each one of us benefits, while the US remains sort of out of that network because of the tariffs.
Boost domestic demand, bring in more private, encourage more private investment, generate more employment, support the agricultural sector more. Some very important reforms that India needs. At the same time, would you agree, sir, that we also, Professor Kumar, that we need to cut red tape, that ease of doing business in India cannot remain just a slogan anymore?
Absolutely right. We need to cut corruption. There is a challenge of rising corruption, which actually makes India non-competitive. We have logistics problems. Our logistics have to improve. Our logistic costs are higher than those in China. So that needs to be taken care of. And therefore, in a sense, we need to improve governance. What the problem is, whether it be our courts, whether it be our police, the governance is a problem. And when governance is weak, then ease of doing business is not there. And if ease of doing business is not there, then investment will be slow. Whether it be in the micro sector, small sector, or the large sector, ease of doing business is very, very important. And that needs to be taken care of.
Well, we certainly hope that the government does get its act together and we start working in the direction of these long overdue economic reforms. I think if there was ever a time that the Indian economy needed it, it is now. Many say that this challenge could very well present a great opportunity for India. The question is, are we going to seize the opportunity? On that note, Brad Bannon, Professor Arun Kumar and Robinder Sachdev, thanks to all of you for joining me on Global Pulse tonight. All right. So what impact are these 50% tariffs going to have on the Indian economy? We will find out in the days ahead. Also, is the Trump administration going to go after the H1B visa program next? That could also deal a heavy blow to the India-US relationship. This is a story we'll track closely here on Global Pulse. Thanks for watching.